Welcome, Taylor.
Yep, I can hear you good.
Great.
We all remember that mic.
Yeah.
We have some questions. Otwell, would you like to start?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have Taylor here, and it's personally for me so great to have met you in person, per se. Because my company, Motherword, actually, the first line of code was written in Laravel framework. So it's an honor for me to be co-hosting this. So we collected some questions, and I have my own questions, but please feel free to ask us any questions. I'm not sure how the questions are going to come to me, but I think we have this special chat screen here. They're going to flow in there. I'm going to read some of the questions and some of them verbally expressed. Okay, Taylor, welcome again. I'm going to start with a broad question. I was kicked out of my own rap band in high school because the lyrics were too philosophical. So when we look at what Taylor does, I see an amazing code base, amazing framework in PHP ecosystem. And we see some open source services around it. We see some for-profit services around it, or code bases, let's say. We see your pronounced support behind front-end frameworks such as Tailwind, TSS, some products from deployment to application scaffolding, conferences, certificates, all those in the package. So what does it feel, all of this? What does it feel like to you nowadays? Do you feel like a business runner, or do you feel like an engineer? Do you feel like a community leader? What's your take in this kind of a broad understanding of Laravel ecosystem and your position?
Well, it's definitely changed throughout the years. So when I first got started, I was definitely almost all of like a coder and just engineer, basically, because it was just me. And before I had any like commercial businesses built around Laravel, there was nothing to do but just work on open source code. But once I started hiring people, once we launched Forge and Vapor and Onvoyer, I actually do have to spend quite a bit more time planning like business related things, like what we're going to work on in the next 6 months, what are we going to work on in the next year. So that takes time. And then just like, reviewing code that the Laravel team members submit, that takes time. So really, like, I spend probably 2 or 3 hours a day just like managing the business, and then the rest of the time I spend still coding. Especially lately, I've been coding quite a bit.
Yeah, we're seeing your documentation updates. Thank you for that. That's the vein of the community. So as you mentioned, once products like Vapor started to come out, were there any conflicts in your day-to-day operation? Okay, so do I need this feature for my business, or do I need this feature for the framework? Or were there any conflicts? I'm sure they fed on each other, but were there any conflicts?
Yeah. So most of the stuff I've built has been because I wanted it for the framework. So like when I first built Forge in 2014, it was because I wanted a really easy way to provision servers and deploy Laravel apps. And to be honest, I didn't really know if it would be a successful business. I just knew that it would be really useful, at least for me personally, and maybe for other people. With Laravel Vapor, I kind of wanted a really easy way to deploy Laravel and have a really scalable platform that could handle, large amounts of traffic or, very busy applications. Because to do that on Laravel Forge, you really have to manage the load balancing and all of that yourself, and you have to kind of manually scale the servers. But with Vapor, you can just kind of deploy and forget about it. So for me, it was more just something I wanted for the framework. And again, I didn't actually know how popular it would be when I was building it, but I was just kind of personally interested in the serverless technology and wanted to explore it. So decided to just go for it. Kind of the same way with Onvoyer as well. Like I needed a way to deploy without any downtime. I think at the time, you know, we wanted to deploy Forge without any downtime, and other applications. So everything I've built has really been to solve like some problem that I actually had. It hasn't necessarily been to you know, do something good for the business. Although like we do a lot of little things that I don't personally need now that, you know, customers ask for, especially like on Forge and Vapor. Like, for example, like user isolation on Laravel Forge, which is a new feature that I think launched this year by James Brooks. I don't really actually have any need for that feature, but you know, little stuff like that we add based on what the customers need, of course. But when I originally wrote the businesses, it was more for myself.
With all these additional products and services, in your mind, do these things change the definition of a framework for you, or do you think the framework is still that, you know, that GitHub repository, or is it the ecosystem?
So, I mean, the framework.
My questions could be philosophical a little bit, too abstract.
Yeah, like the framework is, you know, still like the main focus, and everything else around it has been to try to make that sustainable. You know, because it would actually be totally impossible to maintain this framework without something like Laravel Forge or Vapor, because one, I couldn't work on it full time, and like for example, if I don't do pull requests for one day on Laravel, I would have over 20 pull requests come in every single day. So by the end of the week, I would probably have over 100 pull requests that are not merged. So if I wasn't able to work on it for a month, you know, now we're at like 400 pull requests that are not getting merged. And like, that's when people are like, is the project dead? Is it still alive? Blah, blah, blah. You know, so like, if these commercial things did not exist, Laravel would be dead. Like it wouldn't, we wouldn't be able to have this framework at all. So I'm glad that people actually started using them, because it let us do so much more with the framework. Like all of 2020, like all of this year, I didn't work on, me personally, I'm saying, I didn't work on any commercial stuff. I only worked on open source code and documentation and stuff like that. And like all the Laravel team members like Mohammed and James and Dries and Nuno, well, not Dries, because Dries only works on open source too, but James and Nuno and Mohammed all worked on the commercial stuff, while I and Dries worked on the open source stuff. Like, because we paid Dries a full-time salary to only work on GitHub. He spends all day basically on GitHub.
No, good luck to him with all those PRs. Okay, yeah. Let me ask a question from the audience. Mortaza asked this question, and I think it's also related to the number of PRs that you're getting. He or she is asking, if you had extra free time, what would be the top 3 features that you would add to Laravel?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's kind of what I've been thinking about recently, you know, like trying to decide what do we do next, especially like in the first half of next year. You know, I'm not totally sure. We recently added, we haven't even documented this yet because it hasn't launched until next week, but we recently added 3 or 4 new queue features. One is a failover queue. So if your main queue goes down, you can queue jobs in a backup queue. The other one was around queues and database transactions. So like if you're within a transaction and you create a user, for example, and then an event fires that queues a job that sends a welcome email to the user, you don't really want that job to run if the transaction fails or like rolls back, because the user was never actually created. So Mohammed wrote a feature to handle that sort of situation. After that, you know, I don't know. Like I've been so focused on the documentation that I've been doing all of that. But I know one thing I want to do is not really a code feature, but I want to start recording more videos. I actually tweeted about this yesterday. More videos about how to use different parts of Laravel. I think people always kind of enjoy to hear like the person who created it talk about how they use it or how you should use it. So I'm going to start making more videos about that. So that's kind of the next thing on my plate. We have some more testing ideas we'd like to explore in the next couple of months. I think Nuno is going to be exploring those. We'd like to explore ways to make your tests run a lot faster. So that's going to be something we focus on in the next few weeks as well.
Are you feeling any feature creep in the ecosystem or in the framework?
We kind of tried to trim off some features, like, which we used to have, like all those authentication scaffolding stuff in the framework itself, and then we kicked it out into Laravel/UI, which became sort of Laravel/Breeze and Laravel/Jetstream. So we try to kick those off into packages.
I love that move.
Yeah, so I'm pretty careful with like what I actually try to include. And if you go look at the pull requests on Laravel, you actually see, I mean, a decent amount of them actually do get closed, unfortunately, because like we can't let just so much code into the framework that it becomes bloated and hard to maintain. So that's really my main job, I would say, is sort of, curating what goes in the framework.
Well, now that you mentioned Breeze, I have a question from the audience. Sardar is asking this. Laravel 8 documentation recommends using Breeze as the default starting point. And Breeze is actually using Alpine.js. However, Alpine and Vue.js, he's asking, are mutually exclusive. Don't you think that this fact should be underlined, since it might be frustrating for people looking to install Vue as a second step?
I think the reason I recommend Breeze for people that are new to Laravel is because you can see all of the code. Like, when you install Breeze, it puts the controllers in your app, it puts the routes in your app, so you can explore it and see all the code, and nothing's like hidden from you. I also didn't really want to overwhelm people that are new to the framework with like a JavaScript framework and just let them kind of focus on mainly Blade. There is like a very small amount of Alpine in there, but mainly it's just Blade templates and pretty much basic Laravel components. So I wanted people to be able to just look at that. And then once you get comfortable with that, I think you can sort of decide to graduate or move on to something else, either building your own stack from scratch that you like, or to using Jetstream and Vue and Inertia, or Laravel Livewire and Blade. But I just didn't want to, I wanted Blade to be as simple as possible, because there was quite a few people that felt overwhelmed by Jetstream and were confused because maybe they've never used Livewire, they've never used Vue, and they wanted something really basic like the old Laravel scaffolding, which was pretty much just Bootstrap and I guess some jQuery in Bootstrap, I guess.
Great. I hope this answers your question, Sardar. Emir, do you want to go with the next question?
One question is, there was a long discussions about replacing the primary testing framework of Laravel from PHP unit to Pest. Nuno made a PR, it's rejected. Do you have any plans or opinions about Pest?
I like Pest. We decided to just sort of like put it out there and see what the reaction would be. And again, this is a really good example of how it's very hard to know what people actually think about something until you actually submit it, like on GitHub. So on Twitter, like it feels like lots of people like Pest, but on GitHub, lots of people really wanted to keep PHP unit. So like once I saw it was so controversial, I didn't really want to change anything, because of course everyone kind of knows PHP unit. It's been around forever. But Pest is actually just a layer on top of PHP unit. It still uses PHP unit under the hood, but it's just another change that is scary for people. And why change things if people can always install Pest on their own if they want to use it? So it's not really any big deal to me. But yeah, I was surprised actually that it was so kind of like controversial, but no big deal really.
There is one question that's about the queues and also about feature creep maybe. Someone's asking that I can't spell their name. Why is Laravel not officially supporting RabbitMQ, Kafka, MongoDB, and etc. modern tools with the default packages?
I try to leave some of that to just external packages, because it gets hard to maintain all of these sort of like extra queue systems. I think right now we support like database, Redis, SQS, Beanstalk maybe, and the sync queue, and like adding more is just more stuff we have to maintain. And so if people can add them themselves, that makes it a lot easier for us. Because like once someone contributes something, like it becomes mine. You know what I mean? Like I have to maintain it forever, even if they wrote it initially. And if we have a problem with it, maybe that person doesn't even use PHP anymore, and they don't like come back to help fix the bug. So we have to fix it. So that's why I'm pretty careful about trying to, you know, merge any of that stuff in.
Yeah, actually, when the Socialite released, community do lots of contributions or other integrations. So that kind of stuff should be due to community. So it's really hard to maintain all of the repos for the people. By the way, how many people working for Laravel, both commercial side and open source side?
So there's myself, there's Dries Vince from Belgium. He works only on open source stuff pretty much. There's Mohammed, of course, who is Laravel's first employee in Egypt. He works on Forge and Vapor mainly, and also Spark. There's James Brooks from the UK who works on Forge pretty much exclusively. And there's Nuno Maduro he's from Portugal, but I think he lives in France right now. But he works on mainly Vapor. So pretty much been focused on Vapor since he started back in July. And then we also have, you know, on Laravel Nova, which I kind of co-founded with David Hemphill. He lives here in the U.S. And then Moir from Malaysia works on Laravel Nova as well, full-time with David Hemphill. So
there are 8 or more people working for Laravel under the Laravel. So
yeah,
there is no bus factor, right? So
no, not really, no.
So we have also Laravel Elites, a group of people who loves Laravel. So would you like to say something about the bus factor? People mentioned a lot from maybe 4 or 5 years ago. What happened?
So, you know, like if something, let's just say some crazy thing happened to me, someone else would start running the company. So there's sort of a plan in place to keep Laravel, the business, running, obviously, because we have to keep Laravel Forge running and Vapor and stuff because people's projects are on it. And then also the project itself, you know, there's sort of a plan in place for what would happen in that scenario and for people to gain access to what they need to have access to keep maintaining it. But, you know, it won't be my problem. You know what I mean?
I have a question from Soy Sultan. These are usernames, so I can't really pronounce the names, the actual names. He's asking when would we be able to give routes independently from API.php file regarding the attribute feature that comes with PHP 8? Or are you working on this?
To define routes?
Yeah. Through attributes.
I don't know if I know someone's working on a package to do that. I don't know if we'll support that in the core. We used to support routes via annotations, which to me are similar purpose to attributes, not quite as powerful. And I wasn't a big fan of that because it makes your route definitions feel very spread out all over your application. And versus just like a single routes file, you can see all of the application's routes and right there in the file and modify them. So I don't think I'll ever build like support for that myself, but you can write a package that would read all the annotations and then generate the routes file from the attributes, generate the routes file from the attributes. So that would be, you know, something that someone could write pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. All right. The next question is from Belgium. Frank is asking, How is Spark going? In September, it seemingly was almost ready to go, but we haven't got an update in a while, or maybe he missed it. Is the team just polishing it more, or did the direction change?
It is actually almost ready to go. But when we put out Jetstream, we sort of got distracted by all of that stuff. Like, we started making some changes to Jetstream, and like we wanted to get Jetstream right before we release Spark, because they kind of are complementary. Even though you can use Spark with any Laravel application, you don't really have to use Jetstream to use Spark. That's the next version of Spark, I mean. So once we actually were just talking about this the other day, we plan to release Jetstream, a big update for Jetstream, hopefully before the end of the year. That's pretty much ready to go. There's one large pull request open on Jetstream right now to add social authentication. I'm not really sure if that will get merged or not, but we need to make a decision on that and then we can make the final release for that. So the next release of Jetstream upgrades to Tailwind 2, which released recently, and then also add support for team invitations so that you can send invitation emails when you invite someone to your team if you're using the team feature of Jetstream. It also, let me see, I have a little list of things it add. It added inertia authentication views, password confirmation screens, team invitations, more accessibility features, team switcher improvements, view inertia localization, so stuff like that. I'd like to release that in the next couple of weeks, and then after that's out, then we can finally release Spark, which is actually pretty much close to ready, just like it was a couple months ago. But we just kind of got distracted and working on Jetstream and documentation and all of that. That we haven't worked on it in a few weeks, or really probably about a month and a half. So we'll get back to that and release it hopefully pretty soon.
Well, talking about the delays, Erso is asking, what is the most desired change that you would want to apply in the framework, but you really can't because of the backward compatibility?
That's a good question. There's not a lot of stuff that comes to mind. We've really fixed a lot of stuff over the years, now that it's been like 10 years since Laravel came out. Most of the stuff I really hated has already been fixed. So I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. Sorry.
What about Facades? How do you feel about them? It's been very controversial. Do you love them? Do you hate them?
Yeah, I still think Facades are awesome. I still think they're good.
They're beautiful.
Yeah. So I mean, as long as you use them within reason, you know what I mean? It's more about how you set up your application. So I wouldn't, if your class is using 45 facades, then maybe you're using too many, but if you're just using a facade in a controller, or you're using a couple facades in a class, I was looking the other day, I don't actually use a lot of facades because in my controllers, I inject the HTTP request, and from there I can call request validate. So I don't need the validate facade. To dispatch a job, you can call dispatch right on the job. So I don't need the queue facade. I usually don't really have to use the auth facade because I can access the current user off the request. So the main things I use facade for are maybe the mail facade to send an email, or the hash facade to hash a password. But I don't use that many facades because things have changed in the framework over the years. So to return a view, I just call the view function, it's similar to using a facade, honestly, but so I don't have to use the view facade anymore. But I actually still think they're not that bad of an idea, honestly. They're testable. I don't know. I've never had any big problem with them. When I wrote Laravel Vapor, I wrote tests for the whole application. There were hundreds of tests. But I used facades in Vapor. It's no big deal. The code is clean. You just have to be smart about it, design your application well.
What about code? Taylor prefers using helpers or direct facade?
So sometimes I use helpers. I use the redirect helper. I use the view helper. Of course, the URL helper sometimes. But again, like stuff like session, I just get it off the request object. So I inject the request and I get session variables from the request. See, what else is there? What other helpers? I use some helpers like the abort helper. I don't know. I use a mix of facades and helpers. I think in Laravel Vapor, I used like 7 or 8 facades, different facades.
So people are asking why Vue.js and Laravel are good friends.
Why are they good friends?
Yeah. Why is Vue.js the best friend for Laravel?
I think Vue and Laravel have similar philosophies in that they both try to be pretty easy for beginners, but also powerful for people that know what they're doing. So Vue, at least when I started using Vue, years ago, Vue was a lot easier to start using than React. It had sort of better documentation. You actually at the time didn't really need to compile anything to test it out. It was just a little easier to work with. I mean, even stuff like, vModel and vIf and v4 to me is still easier than using React. But I do like both React and Vue, but I just find Vue a little easier to use. And I think it just fits Laravel's style a little better. But like, I still do actually like React and I like Next.js. I think those are cool tools, but Vue just kind of fits my style better.
I have a couple of questions. Let me go with the first one. Yuan is asking, he apparently loves Forge and Envoyer, and he's asking if there is any chance to merge these two awesome tools one day.
I get asked this quite a bit. Probably, when I first built Forge, people were like, "Oh, don't build things for Laravel only. Build things for all PHP projects." And so then I was like, okay, and I launched Onvoyer, and Onvoyer is not Laravel specific at all. That's why it doesn't even have like Laravel in the domain name. It's just onvoyer.io. So it was attempting to be for every type of PHP project, not Laravel. So I don't really know if they will ever be merged. I think it's possible we would eventually add zero downtime deployment to Forge, but it wouldn't be like merging Onvoyer and Forge. We would just be adding that feature to Laravel Forge. I think that's definitely a possibility in the future.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Regarding Forge, let me continue with that. Uğur is asking if there's any plans for any kind of built-in atomic deployment on Forge.
Yeah, that pretty much. Yeah, we'd like to look at that. That's probably one of the more requested features for Forge. I think we'll probably get to that in the next few months. We implemented a lot of Forge features this year, like database backups and user isolation and all kinds of other features. I know we're going to start looking at cloning sites from another server to a new server soon. And I'd like to look at that zero downtime atomic deployment stuff too.
Another question from Christian. What is your opinion on other PHP frameworks? Actually,
you picked the question, Emir.
Yeah. Actually, last year I were FW days at Ukraine. When Fabian comes to stage, everyone says Laravel to him. So people like that kind of stuff, Yeah. Just asking.
So the only PHP frameworks I've actually used are CodeIgniter and Laravel. And I haven't used CodeIgniter since probably 2011, so like 9 years ago. So I actually don't have any experience with any other PHP frameworks. Like I've used Symfony components, obviously, because Laravel uses Symfony components. So, I'm thankful to Symfony that they have these components we can use, especially like Symfony console, Symfony HTTP foundation. Those are really valuable components for the whole PHP ecosystem. But I've never used Symfony as a framework to try to build an application. I'm not sure. I've only installed it a couple times just to see what the install process was like, but I've never tried to build anything with it. Same for like Zend. I've never used Zend. I've never used Cake. So like I couldn't really give an educated opinion on those frameworks. Laravel is not very inspired by other PHP frameworks. It's more inspired by Ruby frameworks, stuff like that. So look, we didn't really look at PHP frameworks for inspiration when I was building it back in 2010, 2011. I was more looking at like Ruby on Rails, Sinatra, and still to this day, actually, we look at them a little bit for inspiration. But yeah, so I've never used anything else but Laravel and CodeIgniter, so I couldn't really tell you, what other frameworks are like.
Well, Laravel influenced other frameworks in other language ecosystems, such as Golang or Node. Do you have an opinion about the implementation in those ecosystems? Does it work?
I've seen what you're talking about. Like I've seen JavaScript. They have that Adonis framework, and then I've seen one for Python. I've seen one for the Swift programming language that Apple released. I've never looked at the implementation. I mean, to me, that's really cool. It's pretty funny to me that like people are building Laravel sort of inspired frameworks in other languages. But I've never actually looked at how they work. The only one I've actually really explored the documentation on was that Adonis.js in JavaScript. It seemed pretty cool, but I've never tried to build anything with it.
All right. Okay, a very functional question about Forge and Envoyer Vapor. Görkem is asking, do you plan to support other currencies, especially with our currency exchange rate right now? And he's also asking, do you plan to support educational emails for students?
We do support student plans. I think it's in our documentation, but basically you just email us from your student email and we can assign a student discount to you. The currency stuff is interesting because that's kind of one thing we've been working on with Spark. The upcoming Spark is like I said I think I mentioned this at my Laracon talk, but not everyone may have seen it. We're building a version of Spark that supports Paddle as a payment provider, which one cool feature about that is they let you do per country currency and per country pricing. So if someone comes to your website from some country, you can display the price in their currency and maybe even a specific price that's different for that country. So that's something we wanted to support in Spark, and we actually do. We are supporting in the next version of Spark because we have a Paddle version. And then also that version of Spark handles all sorts of tax stuff for you and stuff like that. As far as supporting that in Forge and Onvoyer, it would be a pretty big project because we've been using Stripe for so many years, and to convert everything over to that would be a pretty big project, but it would be, I mean, it would be pretty nice. We'll see, how much work that is, but at least for the next version of Spark, people will be able to do that in their own applications.
Multiple people. Do you want to go, Emir?
You can go with us.
Okay. Multiple people ask similar questions. I'm just going to combine them together from John and Soysal. So with all these products and the additional stuff around them, they're asking, as a human, as a person, how do you manage your life? How do you manage your family? Is this overwhelming for you? Laravel is being updated every day. Is this overwhelming for you? How do you keep up with that? How do you spend time for yourself? How many hours do you work? Just tell us, what time do you wake up, and what do you do during the day, I guess?
Actually, my day is pretty normal. Like I wake up at about 6:30 in the morning, and have breakfast like everyone does. And then usually I get up to the office at like 7:30, which I work at home, so it's just like upstairs in my house. The first couple hours of my day, I actually only spend on GitHub and answering emails. So for any of the businesses like Forge or Vapor, I handle any like refund requests, any cancellations, stuff like that. And then I handle all of our GitHub pull requests for every repository in Laravel, not just the framework, but Forge, Vapor, Socialite, Homestead, Sail, everything. I look at all the pull requests for those. And then after that, that usually takes a couple hours. So like I probably won't be done with that until about 10 in the morning, maybe 9:30. And then the rest of the day I can work on whatever we have work going. So sometimes I'll have a big pull request. So like on Laravel Vapor, for example, yesterday, Mohammed has been working on Docker support in Vapor. So AWS announced that you can run containers on Lambda now. So Mohammed started writing support for that. That was a pretty big pull request. It's big pull requests like that take me maybe an entire hour to review. So I'll have to do something like that. But like, I think people think that I work like all these extra hours, but because Laravel is my full-time job and I can work on it basically 8 or 9 hours a day, I don't really have to work on it outside of normal work hours. So like I usually get done working at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which I guess would be like 1,700 hours and 24-hour time. And pretty much I don't code anymore like at night because since it's my full-time job, I don't really have to. So, you know, it's not like, I think people they feel they compare themselves and like they have a daytime job and then they want to work on these side projects at night. And they're like, oh, I'm too tired to work on it at night, or I worked all day. How does Taylor get all this stuff done? And it's because like, it's my full-time job to work on Laravel. So like, that's what I'm supposed to do. But if I had a full-time job and I also had to work on Laravel on the side, like I would never be able to handle all of that.
Yeah, that would be really difficult, I guess. So in those PRs, are you getting any PRs related to performance optimization? This also regarding to John's question. Do you have any plans, or are you getting PRs for performance optimization? And this was honestly one of my concerns 7 years ago when we started coding, you know, the initial part of MotoWord in Laravel. I kind of isolated the business domain so that, you know, if I encounter any problems in the future, I could just drop this business domain to another framework and, you know, continue living there. What do you think about this performance aspect of the framework?
I don't get as many questions about that as I used to back when I first started Laravel. And I don't know if it's because PHP has gotten a lot faster or just servers have gotten faster over the years, but we do get pull requests sometimes for performance stuff, usually small performance optimizations. But honestly, no, we don't get a lot of those. If you're using, you know, like you just have to build your app what makes sense for you. If you're getting billions of hits a month, then probably you're going to need to tweak your database layer and your caching and stuff like that. But most applications, PHP and Laravel is more than fast enough. You know, like I think about Fathom Analytics on Laravel Vapor a lot. You know, they're handling over 100 million requests a month on Laravel Vapor without doing any sort of like crazy performance optimization, you know, just some basic caching. I think they use DynamoDB in a few places. But I think PHP has helped a lot because when we went from PHP, whatever, 5.6 to PHP 7, and PHP got twice as fast, that was a big deal, you know, and I think a lot of people felt better, I guess, about the performance because not a lot of people ask about it now. But like 6 or 7 years ago, I got asked about performance a lot, actually. And that's why we built Laravel Lumen, because everyone was like, we want something fast, small, light. And a lot of people have these concerns, even if their application it does not have any scaling problems, but they're worried about, you know, the future. But I think with PHP being faster now, I just recommend people start with the regular Laravel framework because stuff's a lot faster than it used to be.
I guess some of the audience is having some connection problems, but we'll just keep going if necessary. The part of the audience can watch the recorded video. But coming from the performance topic, especially today in the conference, we've seen some asynchronous or concurrent or application server approaches to PHP world. You know, Swool or Roadrunner, those kind of solutions. What do you think about those generally for PHP and specifically for Laravel? Do you have any concerns or any excitement about them?
I do think those are cool projects. I would definitely like to see good Laravel support for those projects, because I think, you know, those provide a pretty amazing performance boost as long as you can sort of make sure that your state is managed properly between requests, as far as like the authenticated user or the session or whatever. I know when people have tried to use Laravel with Swool or like PHPKonf, those are kind of the concerns people have, but they really are pretty amazing tools. I'd like to explore them more, honestly, and see if we can make Laravel work even better with those tools, because they really are pretty big performance improvement for applications that need it. I don't think most applications really require that sort of architecture, but there are a few that do, probably. And if we can support that, I think that would be really cool.
Okay, the audience is just talking about the disconnection problem, but there was a more technical question. Someone just mentioned we're asking too many business questions, so I'll get the technical question. He or she is asking, what do you think about using repository pattern in a Laravel project?
The repository pattern is a useful pattern for sure. It saves you from having to duplicate certain query logic across your controllers. So we do use repositories sometimes, even in Laravel Vapor or Forge or Onvoyer. So it sort of just depends on what you're doing. You know, if you have a really complicated query that you need to call from several parts of your application, or you want to be able to mock that whole operation in your test, then definitely a repository pattern is sort of the standard pattern to use for that situation. I don't think you necessarily have to use a repository for every single thing you do with your database. So like a lot of times, if I have a route that is just returning, for example, a list of projects in Vapor, we probably don't use a repository in that situation. We just say, you know, in the controller, we type hint the request. From the request, we say request user projects right off the user model, and then return it straight from the controller, no repository or anything. And then in our tests, we would just actually seed up the test database with records and then hit the database in the test. That's really my preferred way to write Laravel applications, is just to hit either a SQLite memory database or hit, honestly, I'd rather hit just a real MySQL database. The tests are still fast, pretty much. Our slowest tests are the tests that have to talk to AWS. That's the kind of stuff that's actually slow.
I myself had an accident with repositories. We had repositories and models, and somehow we shifted towards using only models in the code base, and repositories were just left alone. You know, weren't really taken care of. So I feel that we're about to end this, but I have a question that excites me. Do you have any features or mechanisms that you created, but that you would think that PHP should have implemented it? So you kind of feel like you worked around them because the PHP was lacking those things.
Let me think.
You have 6 minutes.
Well, I think something like, even like Symfony HTTP Foundation, I feel like could be something